And we're back. Alright, so in this next segment, we're going to be talking about enforcing integrity rules. And we've talked a little bit before in previous segments and previous modules about enforcing referential integrity. And this is done through relationships that we create in our database, relationships of tables. And so when we enforce referential integrity, we're basically not allowing the creation of what we call orphan records. And so that's kind of where the integrity part of this relationship comes into play. And so what I mean by that is if we have two tables, let's say we have our employees table and we have a projects table. And we can have a one-to-many relationship there with the employees being the one part of the relationship and the projects being the many part of the relationship, right? We can have one employee have multiple projects. And so by enforcing referential integrity, when we create a new project, if that integrity is enforced, it will not allow us to create a new project and tie it to an employee that does not exist in the employees table. And so that's what we mean by referential integrity. And so the way that we can enforce this is through those relationships that we create within our tables. And so whenever we set up our relationship, we've talked about primary keys and foreign keys before, and so when we create a relationship, a one-to-many relationship, the primary key of one table becomes the foreign key in another table, and that creates that one-to-many relationship. And when we do that, by default we have enforced referential integrity. And so again, what that entails, or the reason why we do that, is so we don't create orphan records, is what it's called, and it's just basically a way of saying, essentially like incomplete or invalid records. We prevent those from being created. And so we can kind of see the referential integrity in the relationships within our table. So if I open up my database here, if I click on database tools and look at all my relationships, here I can see all the different relationships between the tables. And so I can see my primary keys for each table indicated by the key symbol to the left of it. And then I can see the relationship between each tables. The one side represents the one and the infinity symbol represents the many. So there are those one-to-many relationships. And again, we can see the primary key column ID exists in the table that we're creating a relationship with. It becomes the foreign key. And so the primary key side is the one, and then the foreign key side is the many. And so when we're looking at our relationships like this, when we actually see the one-to-many symbol there, that tells us that we have referential integrity turned on, that we're enforcing that integrity. And we can view that if we just simply right-click on the relationship and look at it. So there we can see enforce referential integrity. If I were to turn this off, right, now that one-to-many relationship is gone. It doesn't show up there anymore because now we will allow those records, those incomplete records, to be created. And typically we do not want that. So we usually, for the most part, enforce referential integrity. And so that's what it looks like in Access. And so if you ever hear someone saying that they're scrubbing a database, essentially what that means is that they're dealing with relationships that are not enforcing that referential integrity, and then they have those incomplete or orphaned records, and they're called orphans because they don't belong to anybody. They're not tied to anything. Like the example that I gave, the project is tied to an employee that doesn't exist, right? So essentially it doesn't have a real employee tied to it. So it's an orphan. It doesn't have that parent, right? Sad. But that's what they're referring to. And so, I've talked about primary keys and foreign keys. And so we can create these, of course, in SQL. We've been, taking a deeper dive into writing SQL statements. And so we can use SQL to identify primary keys and foreign keys, as well as to enforce these referential integrities. So let's take a look at that. All right, so I'll close the relationships window. So for instance, the employees table, if I go to design view, there is no primary key for the employees table, right? I saw that in the relationships, right? It's not tied to anything, it's just kind of on its own out here. And no key symbol, so no primary key, right? This is an earlier version of the JC Consulting database. So let's use some SQL to go ahead and create a primary key for it. So I'm going to create query, switch to SQL. And so typically the primary key, it should be when you create a table, but since we have the table already created, we don't want to create it. We want to, not typing, there we go. We want to alter the table. And the table that we're going to alter is employees. Great. So we're going to alter the employees table, and we're going to add to it the primary key. And so when we're adding primary key, all we need to do is have a set of parentheses and then specify the column that we want to act as the primary key. So in this case, we'll use the employee ID. And if we were creating a composite primary key, meaning that the primary key consisted of multiple fields or multiple columns, we could just put that in there as well. First name, whatever the case may be. This one, we have a unique value with just the employee ID column. It's definitely not spelled correctly. Good. So that's what we're going to use for the primary key. So have that set, run it. Good. Now if I open up the employees table again, switch over to design view, now we can see that we have that key symbol next to employee ID, identifying it as the primary key. So that's pretty fun. All right, so let's close that for now. Let's take a look at our relationships again. Database tools. Good, so now we have a primary key for employees, and that primary key is employee ID. Well, we also have employee ID up here in projects, right? Just like the example that I gave. So we can create that relationship, that one-to-many relationship with employees and employee ID. We saw very early on how to create relationships in the design view, right? We just simply drag and drop. But now that we're using actual SQL, let's use some SQL statements to do that. So again, in this example, all our tables already exist, so we're going to want to alter them. But our employees already has the primary key. What we're really trying to do, what's really going to create that relationship, is by creating the foreign key within projects. So that's the project, that's the table that we want to alter. Projects. Good. And so we're going to change primary key to foreign key, add foreign key. Foreign key is going to be employee ID. That's going to be the same. And we're going to say that it references, and again, All capitals does not matter. It is case insensitive, but it's typically best practice to kind of help distinguish everything. It's going to reference the employees table. So I'll run this. Good. So I ran that, didn't get an error, so that's always good news. Let me just close my relationships first. Now when I open it back up, it should have the updated relationship in it. And in fact it does. Good. So we can see employee ID, the one-to-many relationship created there. And so you can see that it automatically enforced that referential integrity. As soon as we create that relationship, it automatically enforces that. Because again, that's typically the way that you're going to set up your databases. All right. So that's pretty fun. Yep. Good. All right, so let's talk about cascading records. So when we're enforcing referential integrity, we have the option to cascade update related fields, and we also have the option to cascade delete related records. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means when we update a record in the field that has a primary key, the field in the related table that has the foreign key also gets updated with that update. And so that's why we kind of refer to it as cascading, because it kind of cascades to the other table. Same with deleting records. When you delete record on the primary key field, primary key table, right, the one side of the relationship, the related records on the many side of the relationship with the foreign key also get deleted. And so the reason why we can only do this when we are enforcing referential integrity is because if we allow this when we're not enforcing it, then we are most certainly going to create orphan records. Not always, but a very good chance, right? For instance, let's say that an employee gets fired, right? Let me back up here. Let's say that an employee is planning on retiring, right? So before he retires, he's going to make sure that all of his projects are finished and completed, right? So with having referential integrity enforced, we need to make sure that there are no existing records in the project table that are related to this employee that's going to retire, right? So what I mean by that is by enforcing referential integrity, if he retires and we try to delete him out of the employee table, if he has any projects in the projects table that are tied to him through that relationship, it will not allow the deletion of him from the employee table, right? He needs to make sure that he finishes all his projects before he retires. So he finishes all his projects are complete, there are no more projects in the project table with his employee ID tied to them. Once that is the case, then we can delete him from the employee table because we are enforcing that referential integrity. Now, let's say that an employee just simply gets fired, but he was working on 3 different projects. He's removed from the employee table, but now those 3 projects that exist in the projects table are now orphaned records because their parent, the employee table, he's gone from the employee table. So the 3 records on the project table are now have no employee tied to it. They're orphaned, right? Because he was responsible for those projects. And so once we kicked him out of the employee table, it deleted him from the employee table, but it didn't delete the records from the project table. So now those 3 projects are just left orphaned. So that's why you can only enforce cascading when referential integrity is enforced. So again, cascade update related fields. When you change something on the one side of the relationship, essentially the primary key, it automatically cascades to the related table that has a foreign key and updates those records as well. Same with cascading deleted related records. When you delete a record on the one side of relationship to primary key, all related records in the foreign key are also deleted. But again, you can only do that if you're enforcing referential integrity. So to do that, very simple. Just open up your relationships menu again, edit the relationship, and right underneath enforce referential integrity are our 2 cascading options. So if I turn that off, you'll notice that the cascades automatically get grayed out because I can no longer select them. So that's pretty great. Hey look, a picture of what I just showed you. Excellent. So yeah, enforce referential. All right, I'm done. That and then cascading records. So next we have legal values integrity. This one's fairly simple, right? We're just enforcing that in a specific field, if it requires a specific value, you cannot put a different type of value, right? And so we can create validation rules that will check to make sure that when a user enters a record into the database, that they're entering the legal value or an appropriate legal value for that field. And so in SQL, the statement that we use to do that is check yourself before you wreck. All right, so we're going to open up SQL, yep, just like we always do. Again, similar to the other examples, this is typically done in a create table statement. Since we have our tables created already, we're going to alter the table. And for this example, we're going to alter the table of task master list. And so we're going to add a check, and this is, the validation essentially, and we're going to add it to the column of per, right? If I open up this table, I got the column per, right? So we can see we got hour, project, and month. So those are going to be our validation checks. So we're going to say per in, and remember the keyword in is just what we use when we're specifying like a list that we want to use essentially. So we're going to say hour, month, and project, just like what we looked at. Good, so we're going to alter the task master list table, and we're going to add a check, a validation, to the per field and tell it that it needs to check to make sure that it's either one of these 3 that are in this list: hour, month, or project. So we run this. Good, and then if we open up our table, go to design view, come down to our per field. If we click on lookup, we can see our validation right there. Good, so, nope, don't want to save this, don't want to save that. So we can do that. We can also do it in design view as well. If I open up my table, go to design view, we can just simply add it to our validation down here. We'll see validation rule and validation text. So our rule is going to be, it needs to be either by hour or by month or by project. And then we can add some validation text there. So if they try to enter something other than one of those three options, it will display this message that we put in the validation text. So we say you must enter hour, month, or project. Perfect. And it's that simple. And then we even have a test validation rules that we can run to make sure that our tables are valid. So yep, this operation will test the table's records against the validation rules. This process may take a long time, and that depends on the size of your database. And these are relatively small, so should be fairly quickly. Do you want to save the table first? Yep, that's fine. Oh, I definitely put that in the wrong field. So let's take that back, exit out of that, add this to the correct field. Put this back in here, so we want hour, month, project, or that one's already there, that's fine. Good. All right, let's try that again. Yep. Yep, we gotta save it again. It's just asking me this because I just changed where the validation was, so it's asking me if I want to save my old changes or the new changes. I want the new ones. And there it says all data was valid. So, good news there. Good, so that's enforcing legal value integrity. Yeah, just what I showed you. Perfect. Good. So that wraps up this segment all on enforcing integrity rules. We talked about referential integrity. We talked about valid legal values integrity. And we also talked about cascading values. Again, can only be done if we're enforcing referential integrity. Good. So I hope you guys have found this useful, and we will see you next time.